Hello everyone and welcome back to the Great Book of Grudges. My name is Nathan and we find ourselves in the Moot. And today we're going to have a little bit of discussion about Halflings. Yeah, I know, it's a bit of a weird thing and we're going to put the memes aside. We're actually going to have a proper discussion about the Halflings. You see, how Warhammer 3 has been developing and how DLC has been coming into effect makes me think that we could legitimately have Halflings in the game in the future. I'm not saying like this year, next year. Hell, I'd even be surprised if it happened within 2 years, but I think that Halflings could actually become a DLC, and there's a few reasons why. Now, why am I thinking about this? Well, really, the Halflings are actually quite important when it comes to the Empire. They are a electoral state. Granted, they only have half a vote, but it's still a half a vote. And the grand majority of the Halflings themselves, well, those that are known, live in the lands of the Empire, mostly through the Mootland once again. Hell, if we go into older editions, specifically 5th edition, I want to believe, the Hungry Hordes was a thing. This was a Citadel Journal thing, which, yes, was a Halfling army list. It was a lot of jokes, a lot of memery there. Hell, they even had the whole Fellowship of the Ring thing there. But 5th edition wasn't when GW actually started being original. I know, it's taking a while, but it actually got more Warhammer Grimdark style around 6th onwards. Yeah, they're not saying that they've ever been original. But yeah, they've got an army list, and we'll talk about the army list a little bit later on, but we can expand upon this. Why would something from 5th edition make its way into an army? Why would it be a DLC? Why is there a chance for this? Well, there's a few things that we can talk about. Well, first up, and the most obvious thing to look at, is Warhammer the Old World, the return of Warhammer Fantasy, which has a map update that's been very recent, and that also mentions the Mootland. Well, their logo, and it looks like the Moot is a little bit larger here, because this is right before they kind of join the Empire. It's a bit of a weird position in time. Then again, the timeline could be changing. For the most part, the Halflings were kind of neutral. They were allowed to kind of just live in peace. When the Vampire Wars kick in, that's when they are kind of forced to serve in the Empire, because they're immune to the whole vampirism thing. It's very likely that we will see Moot stuff being introduced for Warhammer the Old World, because it kind of makes sense. I mean, they could easily just add in some units for the Empire roster, some basic cheap chaff and stuff like that. And not only that, but we're likely going to get a Vampire Wars scenario when it comes to Warhammer the Old World. I mean, it just makes sense. Plus the fact that GW actually really like their Halflings. They've even done spotlights when the Halflings weren't available to buy anymore. And hell, the Halflings are coming back for Blood Bowl quite heavily. Cool new characters and stuff, so it's very obvious that GW still has a very big soft spot for them. But we're here to talk about Total War, because even if Halflings did become a thing in Old World, I probably wouldn't play them, because I'm just not really interested in playing Empire. I prefer the more evil, destruction-based races. So if they're gonna get some stuff in Old World, does that mean that they could get stuff in Total War? And the answer is very much yes. So we already have the Moot, and that might not seem like enough, but it's okay to do for a mini-race, sub-race. You get what I'm saying here? You see, the Champions of Chaos DLC added in sub-races. This is for the Khornate faction, the Sineshi faction, the Nurgle faction, the Tzeentchian faction, the 4 legendary lords that were introduced in that DLC. They have a different roster each. That means that they can play around with different mechanics and have something that's attached to a main faction's main race and have a completely different playstyle. Hell, they even have their own different mechanics, and they have their own tech trees too, which would work very well for the Halflings. And the Empire definitely has space for more legendary lords, even when we add in the obvious ones, the ones that are missing, like say for example Boris Todbringer, Elsef, and well, I'd like to say Marius because he's one of my favorites. That takes us up to what, 7? Yeah, still a decent amount of space there, and the fact is that, well, right now the most we have is 8 on the Warriors of Chaos, right? Like, we could easily have more Warriors of Chaos as time progresses, so we could easily have a lot of Legendary Lords. But I think what the most important thing to talk about here when it comes to the Empire is, even if we get all these different ones, like say for example Null, right, with Elsef, that would still be an Empire faction. It'd just be very shooty, but we're not expecting a bunch of new units unless new stuff does come in for the Old World. And yeah, Boris is going to get more units, right? There's the Cult of Ulrich, and we have a lot of stuff that was established in 6th edition. But then if you start talking about like Marius or any of the other missing elect accounts, unless new stuff for Old World comes in is quite drastic, most of the factions are just going to play exactly the same way. Hell, we already have a lot of factions that play exactly the same way too. Even Volkmar, who has his own unique mechanic, well, yeah, he's still an Empire faction, right? So what if the Halflings were introduced and brought in as a sub-faction for the Empire and had their own army, their own mechanics, and their own different playstyle? Again, mirroring that of the Champions of Chaos DLC. And they could easily still recruit Empire stuff by using the same mechanic, the whole reinforcement mechanic from Marcus Wolfhard. I mean, it's already an Empire thing, and it kind of works out really, really well. So you'd still have the majority of your Halfling armies, it should mostly be Halflings, but then you could end up with, you know, some great swords, some handgunners, hell, even a mortar or a steam tank if you're lucky. Mind you, you should have your own anyway because of Kathleen, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But I think something like this would work out quite well. So if we look at the possible army list for the Halflings, we can go back to the Hungry Hordes, right? And yeah, it's got everything you need. It's basically got lord choices, hero choices. It's got all your units, like loads and loads of different units, which they would be unique. But essentially, the amount of units would be enough to basically cover a roster. And this would be kind of interesting. See, this would be a race with 1, maybe 2 legendary lords at the very most, and yeah, a unique army of Halflings, which wouldn't really have the best stats, let's be very honest here, and a bunch of monsters. You'd get like the War Sheep, the Battle Rams, the Baby Dragons, Goat Riders, the Hot Pot. This is all stuff that we had from many, many years ago. I mean, a lot of the stuff had to be kit bashed too. At least that's how I remember it. 5th edition was a long time ago. The baseline for an army is here, which could work out pretty well as, yeah, it would work in a meme faction, let's be honest, but think about it this way. If Creative Assembly are finding a slow period where they're like, well, we don't really have a big faction to release at the very moment, or next year, or whatever, Halflings could come in as a way to just show some humor, which is something that's really important. Warhammer is supposed to be kind of satirical and humorous and stuff like that. It's not all grimdark. And what better than a bunch of, well, hungry Halflings? That's the best way to explain it, really. Going from a tabletop perspective, if you compared it to like a tabletop standard, the stats themselves aren't actually that bad. I mean, they're not great. For the most part, they're really not great, but they're fairly decent for what they are. And remember, in a Total War perspective, they would be better because, you know, you'd have tech trees to be able to boost them up, you'd have character skills, you'd have all these different things that would make them stronger as you level. But this, in theory, should be a difficult campaign because, I mean, it's a Halfling. For a possible legendary lord, it would be Hisme Stoutheart, who unfortunately has no art as far as I'm aware, but that's the current leader of the Moot. The character was mentioned during the whole time that Franz was trying to become emperor, obviously then the whole case of the Storm of Chaos, because the Storm of Chaos was a big thing. So there's a bit of a canonful conflict. We don't know if Hisme is actually a dude or a woman, because the lore has referenced Hisme as both. It depends on where you look at in the source. But, yeah, it's a possible character, which would be there to boost up your Halflings, you know, extra strength to your Halflings, extra movement, whatever, you know, just to give you a few little boosts up, because you're going to need it, especially since you'd be starting next to Sylvania, which would give you a bit of a problem. And we spoke about the reinforcement mechanic, which obviously makes a lot of sense, and to cut costs even further, so the majority of the effort can go onto the models rather than mechanics, because let's be fair, Halflings could just use mechanics that are already in place, as that already has been proven that reusing mechanics does work when it makes sense. And as you've seen on the screen, well, yeah, Grom's food mechanic. I mean, who better than Halflings, you know? Grom likes to eat, Halflings like to eat. It didn't make sense to put this for the Ogres, which is why the Ogres didn't get it, but if it's going to get reused again, Halflings, it's the perfect thing. All you have to do is get some, you know, just get some ingredients, mix them up. They'd have to be changed around and obviously rebalanced, but it's the same framework, it's the same basic coding, essentially. Not all of it, because obviously then stuff has to change around, but you know what I mean. So mechanic-wise, they're kind of sorted. Roster-wise, they're kind of sorted. And it kind of makes sense for them to do it. Like I said, if they're finding a slow period, they could easily knock this out, as most of the halflings would use the very same animations. The only thing that would be different is the skins, right? And, well, again, the idea of adding in some smaller races which still get a lot of lore. The halflings still get a decent amount of lore when it comes to Warhammer Fantasy roleplay, and just in general, loads of other things. It's a way to introduce new races without going full ham of making everything unique, making it a full legendary lord thing. And this is a faction which wouldn't really need to be added in through just Immortal Empires, as even if the moot isn't in the Realm of Chaos map, which to be honest I haven't checked, we know it's very possible to just expand the map, and there you go. There you've got the faction location, which would be very different and obviously would not really be close to playable factions, barring Scrog, so you've already got a viable start. The grand majority of us only really care about the Immortal Empires, because, well, that makes sense, and we know exactly where they'll start. There's one position there, and then you can just expand from there. I don't know, I've just been thinking about this a lot lately, because I like the halflings, I do. I think halflings are kind of cool, and yeah, we have a really cool mod for that with Warhammer 2, which will likely get ported into Warhammer 3, but officially would be really nice, because I do think that we're going to get miniatures for Warhammer the Old World, so it just kind of makes sense. I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Let's start a bit of a discussion. I know a lot of you aren't too interested in the halflings, but think about it this way. If halflings get done, then there's potential for Amazons in the future and so on. So that's always really important to take note of. Anyways, I'll see you all again very, very soon, and have a good day.